Good morning. I'm nearly 82 years old, and while I don't have any serious pre-existing conditions, I'm at a much greater risk than I was a couple of decades ago. When we moved here, we moved into Roseville on the south side of Milwaukee. They have done a wonderful job of taking care of my physical well-being. I'm well housed, well fed, and they have done a super job of protecting my health during the pandemic. But that's just my physical well-being. For my spiritual well-being, I have this church. And just as with Roseville, this church has stepped up to see me through the stresses, normal, and those compounded by COVID. Suddenly, we could not meet in person. But a host of people quickly figured out ways for us to meet via Zoom. And who can forget our drive-through water communion in the parking lot? Book groups, men's group, etc. have been there for us. The church has provided space for AA and other groups. I'm inspired by the sermons, gain wisdom from the reflections. I'm awed by the musical talents of our members and know that I'm surrounded by a warm, loving community. So our congregation is important to this community and to me personally. Unfortunately, it doesn't just happen magically. We have staff, bills for water and electricity, building repairs, and that's why I'm up here today, to remind you of how important you are. It's your financial contributions that make this all possible. That's why Marina and I pledged to this church, and I urge you to do so as well. If you've not already done so, dig out that green pledge form and fill it out and send it in by this Friday, please. And if it's gotten lost somewhere under a pile of things on your desk and you can't find it, call the office and get another one. And send it in and be generous.
I have to admit that adjusting to COVID restrictions in the past 2 years has not been that odious for my husband and myself. That's because one of us is sort of elderly and the other is card-carrying elderly. True, we haven't been able to see our friends except on Zoom, but we haven't carried out a very busy social life in the last 5 years or so. We have gathered with vaccinated family members on a handful of occasions. We enjoy home life. A few TV shows, home-cooked meals, discussing current events, and reading. I talk on the phone with my friends a lot, and even have Zoom meetings with my choir buddies on Wednesday night. All my business consultations are also on the phone. I can work in my sweats. One of my best friends is a designer, and she immediately launched into making hundreds of masks of every color, masks for little kids. And the Nealey men have very long jaws, and so I said, could you make a mask that fits a little bit better? What a great idea, she said, and marked those large. She was vaccinated and simply not worried about being out in the community, dispensing and selling her masks. The soul of generosity. Some she gave to senior residents and others to fire stations. She followed Dr. Fauci's advice and went upon her business. The 4-year-old next door was another matter altogether. She would have a screaming meltdown every other day. Her mother had had surgery, which kept her home from work with this little extrovert. I want to go to McDonald's. I want to see my friends. I want to go to the library. I want to go to Hawaii and see Grandma. I want. And then the tears would flow. Had she been 16, the story might have been much the same, but with more sulking and fewer tears. I want to see my friends. Then I realized that the young, the extroverted, athletes, young working parents, cashiers, laid-off workers, renters, and of course the ill and dying were suffering a great deal. Youngsters who couldn't develop the social skills they needed were experiencing psychological damage, and I felt so sorry for them. No one in my circle of friends or associates contracted COVID, were hospitalized, much less died. But I read countless stories about those that did. Everyone in our extended family got vaccinated except one couple and their adult child. The husband read something on the internet. Up until then, I was aware of the politicization of masks, but not medical reasons. I have struggled with conflicting advice from alternative healthcare providers. Sometimes I don't even know what information to trust. I feel like Alice in Wonderland. Even though I'm not required to wear a mask now when I go to the grocery store, I notice that all the workers are still wearing them, and so I wear them too. We need to just take care of one another physically, emotionally, and spiritually. This prayer is from Reverend Jane Recepta. O Spirit of life and renewal, we have wintered enough, mourned enough, oppressed ourselves enough. Our souls are too long cold and buried, our dreams all but forgotten, our hopes unheard. We are waiting to arise from the dead. In this season of steady rebirth, we awaken to the power so abundant, so holy, that returns each year through earth and sky. We will find our hearts again and our good spirits. We will love and believe and give and wonder and feel again the eternal powers. The flow of life moves ever onward through one faithful spring and another, and now another. May we be forever grateful. Alleluia, amen.
Well, we made it this far. Not everyone did. Many of us lost friends or loved ones. In the United States, more than 1 million people have died from COVID to date. Worldwide, that figure is more than 6 million. I confess, it seemed strange to me that 1/6 of the deaths due to COVID come from the United States. We're the 3rd largest country in the world, but we only have 4.25% of the population. And we've had over 16% of the world's deaths to this disease. We tend to think of ourselves as a country with good health care when really we're a country with expensive health care. Perhaps the most stunning statistic to me was that the United States had more than twice as many cases as the next highest country, India, which has 4 times the population we do. China, the most populous country in the world, the place where the virus was thought to originate and was first discovered, they were 117th on the list of countries of number of cases. Now, it is certainly possible that some countries underreported, but there is still something important there. And when I read this yesterday morning, it gave a whole new meaning to the old adage, freedom isn't free. Because as a nation, our collective fussing about masks and vaccines and staying home meant that we had more cases and more long COVID and more deaths than anyone else, and frankly, that is soul-crushing. I worry about our country. It is my belief that we have very little stick-to-itiveness. Remember after 9/11, how united we were for all of 4 or 6 weeks? I think as a culture, the enormous value we place on individualism makes us far less likely to sacrifice for the common good for very long. We haven't had a war on our soil in 175 years, with the bombing of Hawaii as the one exception. I think as an entire united nation, we don't have a lot of patience with sacrifice. Now, I know individuals and even cities and states that worked really, really hard. The fact that 2 years later we are sitting in here all wearing our masks, trying our best, means that we are trying really hard. But our numbers are so much higher than most other countries because we are so divided politically, and we managed to make a pandemic political. That's one of the things that I love about the story of the purple hen. We are stronger together. We don't have to do it by ourselves, because going it alone is soul-crushing. It is not the only soul-crushing thing about this pandemic. I know that deaths from violence and drug overdoses and deaths of despair rose significantly as well. I talked to someone before the service who told me how hard this has been on some of our youngest kids. I have this really sad memory of, there was a house that I used to walk past on a walk, and there was a new baby, and so mom and the new baby tended to be inside, and the, I would say, probably 2-year-old little boy was out on the front porch with his dad a lot. And he was a chatty kid, and we would talk. And then there was a day when he saw me, who was a stranger, and just like started to cry and get super anxious because he'd been told that he had to stay away from strangers. It is so hard to figure out the balance. And as much as we wish it was, it's not over yet. This is not a disease that's going to go away. It's a disease that has become endemic. We'll need to get booster shots like the flu, and it will continue to take a toll each year. And yet we are getting back to normal in a way that is both necessary and in some ways deeply troublesome, especially for those folks with chronic health conditions. So I wanted to talk about that today. I wanted to talk about the lessons that we've learned and those which might help if they stuck, and those which are very hard to get to stick. I have a picture in my head of that first week or so after the shutdown. Now, to understand this, you have to understand something about me, which is that I know a lot of folks who like nothing better than a day at home in their PJs or a whole week at home. They're happy being home and don't have any particular desire to go anywhere much of the time. Diane and Horace illustrated that today for us so beautifully. And that is so not me. I really like to get out of the house every day. About 36 hours is my limit. I am the person who will walk to the store in a snowstorm just because I need to get out of the house and get outside. And so quite early on, I went for walks. I stayed away from everyone else. I wore a mask in the beginning, and once we learned more about transmission, I didn't wear a mask outside unless I was like really close to other people. And I walked down to 80th and Stark, which is the heart of my neighborhood, Montevilla. It's about 8/10 of a mile from my house, so there and back was a decent walk, and it gave me a destination, which always helps. And that first week or two, I took pictures because blocks that are usually bustling with cars and people were absolutely deserted. It was eerie, the desolation of it. Now, and frankly, for the last several months, my neighborhood is pretty much back to normal. There are covered tables in the streets for outdoor dining at Miyamoto's and Roscoe's and Hungry Heart and all the restaurants around there. The hot tub by the hour place is probably closed for good, but the movie theater reopened about 2 months ago. It feels good. But what I'd like to invite us all to do is to remember what was good about quarantine. Did you spend more time together as a family? Did you run fewer errands? Did life have less of a frantic feel? What worked for you? I'm going to give you a minute to think about that. There were ways in which that was a really sweet time for me. Jill went back east and picked up both of our daughters who were at college and brought them back and deposited them at my house, and they did not leave for 13 weeks. And as someone who's been a divorced parent since they were 8 and 11, I had not had 13 straight weeks with my kids since they were 8 and 11. We made a lot of cookie dough. We had a little sign up saying days since the last batch of cookie dough. And now I'd like you to be honest. How many of those pluses have just gone by the wayside? And are there any that you'd like to get back? I was thinking about that this week as I made 3 choices, some good, some bad. First, on Monday, it was a nasty, rainy day. I was tired and I was stalling to get into work. And suddenly I realized that I didn't need to drive to the office to work. I had successfully worked from home for about 16 months. I returned to working in the office because Vivian was new and needed guidance. She's our office administrator, but now she's got things down and she had Monday off anyway. And so I decided to work from home, and I had a really productive day. And that was a good thing for me to remember. The second was about cooking. On Thursday night, my partner Deese went back to work, and Mika was at her other mom's house. And the first night I am alone in the house, I tend to go do something. I will take myself out to dinner or go see a movie, anywhere to have people around me. The house just feels empty. And I'm not crazy about it. So I'd been planning to go to dinner. And then I realized that I had cauliflower that I could roast and eat with some avocado toast, and so I stayed home and made myself dinner. Cheaper, healthier, just fine. It was so easy for me to fall back into my old habits. One would think that after a full year of something, we'd get used to it. But in my experience, it was easier to go back to our previous definition of normal. I've had that experience again about masks. We know that masks stop the spread of all sorts of things. There was almost no flu season in 2020. I don't mind wearing masks indoors around strangers in particular. But also last week, our intern minister, Stephanie, and I walked down to the Hive, the new restaurant on the corner, and we put on our masks and we went inside, and not a single person, staff or customer, was wearing a mask. And I took mine off because I felt really self-conscious being the only person wearing one. And this is the kind of peer pressure that made me so glad that our governor was willing to be the heavy and pass a mask mandate. Because for me, it's really hard to be the only person in the room wearing a mask. And that's one of the reasons that we're still wearing masks for worship. Because our youngest kids can't get vaccinated. Some of their parents don't want them around unmasked people. And it's so much easier for kids if they aren't the only ones who are wearing masks. And we have folks with health conditions that mean they're likely to get sick or really sick. And so rather than making them stand out, we're all just still wearing masks for now during worship. Now, don't get me wrong, we did have a board meeting the other day, and we all decided as a group of vaccinated adults that we were comfortable without masks, and that was so amazing. It was both strange and not strange at all to be in a room with 9 or so people and get to see everyone's faces. And technology is also great. Sometimes I really love that I can go to evening meetings and not have to drive home in the rain at 9:30 at night. That's pretty awesome. It saves gas, it reduces carbon emissions, and it makes the world more accessible for people with disabilities. I really, really hope that we never go completely back. I want to grab onto the both and to make it so folks who feel sick one day can still participate from home. At the board meeting, Mike's back was hurting, and so he Zoomed into our board meeting and said it worked just fine. There are 36 people who have decided that they would rather be at home and still get to come to church. And we're grateful that we can still be accessible to everyone. I need to remind myself what I can do to retain the positive things about quarantine. I really love that it feels more precious to me to see and hug my extended family. I love that I can wear a mask to protect myself and others from all sorts of respiratory illnesses. I love that we have more permission and obligation to stay home when we are sick and keep our germs to ourselves, thank you very much, as the teachers are nodding along enthusiastically. And boy, do I appreciate my friends more and more. My best friend, Darby, I was careful. Darby was more careful for reasons. And she would not hug anybody that wasn't in her household until like 3 weeks post the second vaccine. And she had a friend come up from California and was like, "Hey, hug me." And Darby said, "No, you are not my first hug. My first hug is Marcia, and we have been waiting about 16 months to do this." I know that many of you are so grateful and appreciative that we kept church going. I'm glad to. I'm glad that folks can decide week to week even if they want to come into the building and see people or stay home and watch from there. I'm glad we have more options everywhere. And boy, do I like hearing you laugh in person. We did it. It's not over yet. As Lynn Unger wrote, we are connected in ways that are terrifying and beautiful. Our lives are in one another's hands. Let's try and remember and hold on to those good changes that we made. Let's not be in such a hurry to get back to a normal that never really worked for anyone or for everyone. Let's hold on to those positive changes, to the both and. Blessed be, my friends, and amen.